I guess it started with the envelope, bright orange, slapped under my windshield wiper like some kind of warning ticket from the universe. It was a Tuesday morning, chilly for late October. I was walking out of a dentist appointment when I saw it. Something about the way the paper flapped in the breeze made me uneasy. It wasn't a flyer. It wasn't a parking violation, just a thick envelope with my name typed across the front. Everett. Now, I don't know about you, but when a man gets an unmarked envelope on a random weekday from someone who clearly knows his name, you pause. I sat in my car for nearly 15 minutes before I opened it. Inside were two things: a single-page printout with a date, time, and location, and a photo. The photo was grainy, but I knew the hair, the shape of her shoulder, the delicate curve of her neck I'd kissed 1,000 times. It was my wife, Meline. She was seated at an outdoor cafe table, facing someone I didn't recognize. A man. He was reaching across the table, holding her hand. But the part that locked the air in my chest was her expression. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the kind of polite smile she gave me when I brought her coffee in the morning. Not the tired smile after dinner. This was something raw, playful, private. I didn't confront her that night or the next. Instead, I did something I'm not proud of. I watched. I observed. I took notes like a coward who would rather collect pain than face it. Meline and I have been married for 7 years. No kids, no real fights either. That was the strange part. We weren't toxic. We were just background noise to each other. Or at least that's what I thought. The next 2 weeks unraveled the truth like a slow bleed. Thursday afternoon, she told me she had a design meeting downtown. She left in a gray blazer and white heels, the ones she never wore for me. I waited 10 minutes, got in my car, and followed. I expected an office. Instead, she pulled into the parking garage of a boutique hotel. I parked far enough back that she wouldn't notice and watched as she stepped out of her car and into his arms. No hesitation, no glancing around. She wrapped her arms around him like she belonged there. I sat in my car for over 2 hours watching their window light turn on, then off. It was the same floor the hotel website listed as Luxury Corner Suites. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even get angry. I just sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. That night I cooked dinner. Chicken marsala, her favorite. She came home late, claiming the meeting ran over and traffic was horrible. She kissed me on the cheek and took a bite of the meal I'd made with the same mouth that had kissed him just hours earlier. And I smiled because I knew something she didn't. I was going to disappear. No drama, no goodbye letter, no yelling, just gone. Meline had made her choice, and I was about to make mine. What I didn't know then, what no one could have predicted, was that she'd come searching for me exactly 1 year later. And what she said, I still don't believe it was real. You'd be surprised how easy it is to disappear when no one's really looking for you. In the weeks that followed that night, after the hotel, after the lies about her design meetings, I kept the charade alive. Not for her, for me. I wanted time, space to build the quiet escape I never thought I'd need from someone I once vowed forever to. I stopped adding to our joint savings and opened a private account under my middle name, August. She never asked. She never noticed. I transferred small amounts, enough to fund what I now thought of as my reboot fund. Gas, lodging, food, and silence. I picked a date, December 14th, a meaningless Thursday, the kind of day no one remembers. No birthdays, no anniversaries, just nothing. I figured disappearing on a day like that would create less noise. I didn't want drama. I didn't want Meline chasing after me with crocodile tears and half-hearted apologies. I just wanted out. But the universe doesn't hand you exits without a cost. Exactly 1 week before my planned departure, her phone lit up while she was in the shower. Normally, I wouldn't have even looked, but it was angled just enough that I saw the name, Dylan. No emoji, just Dylan. The message read, "Counting the minutes. Your scent's still on me." I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before quietly flipping her phone face down. My hands were steady, my breathing flat, but inside it felt like something in my brain disconnected, like a wire snapped loose and started sparking behind my eyes. Still, I said nothing. I remember taking a long drive that night. Just me, the cold, and the ticking of my turn signals as I aimlessly cruised around the edges of town. I didn't have music on. I didn't even bring my wallet. I just needed motion. Stillness made it feel real. Movement made it feel like maybe I could still outrun it. I slept in the guest room after I got home. Told her I had a headache. She didn't press, didn't follow, just mumbled, "Love you," as she slipped into our bed alone. 3 days before my escape, I removed every trace of myself from our shared computer. I deleted browser history, changed passwords, transferred key documents to a hard drive I kept in a storage unit under a fake name. I wiped myself like I was dying and didn't want to leave a ghost behind. And still some sick part of me hoped she'd notice. That she'd grab me by the hand, look me in the eye, and say, "I'm sorry. I've been a fool. I want you. Only you." But she never did. On the morning of December 14th, I packed everything I needed into a duffel bag I'd hidden in the trunk of my car 2 days earlier. I waited until she left for her usual spin class. Then I walked through the house one last time. I touched the hallway where we used to hang anniversary photos, most of them gone now. I paused at the kitchen table where we once laughed about nothing. I lingered at the door of the bedroom, where I now only slept alone in spirit. And then I left. No letter, no message, no email. I simply vanished. I drove 3 states over, changed my phone number, deleted every social media account I had, and checked into a little lakeside motel under the name Evan L. August. It was small, dated, and quiet. Perfect. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Nain, offered me a discount after I told her I was just looking to write for a while. She didn't ask questions. That made her the kindest person I'd met in months. For the first time in years, I woke up without pressure, without masks, just me and the ache. But the ache didn't go away. Nights were the worst. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, playing back every moment that now seemed like foreshadowing. The days she said she was tired. The birthday dinner she skipped for a last-minute work trip. The perfume I noticed months ago that wasn't the one I bought her. The way she stopped reaching for my hand in public. I replayed all of it over and over, wondering if there had ever been a chance to fix it or if it was always meant to burn. Weeks passed, then months. I thought I'd be free. I thought once I left, the weight would lift and the air would finally feel clean. But grief is strange. It doesn't show up when you expect. It sneaks in with the scent of her shampoo on a stranger in the grocery store. It slaps you when you see couples holding hands at sunset. It curls up beside you in motel rooms at 2:14 a.m. when all you have are shadows and your heartbeat. Still, I stayed gone. I never checked in on her. Never Googled her name. Never reached out to friends. Until the day she found me. A year, almost to the day after I vanished, Meline showed up at the edge of that lakeside motel. No warning, no call, just there. She looked different. A little thinner, eyes tired, makeup softer. Like the life she'd lived without me had left scars I couldn't see. And then she said something I never expected. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember dropping the half-eaten sandwich I had in my hands or letting the motel room door swing wide open behind me. All I remember is that Meline was suddenly there, 10 feet away from me in faded jeans and a windbreaker, standing beneath a gray sky like she'd been caught in the rain and didn't care. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Her presence cracked something open inside me, something I thought I'd buried under 12 months of silence. And she just stared at me like she wasn't sure I was real, like I was a mirage after a very long walk through the desert she'd created. Finally, she said, "Everett, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to drag you back. I just need to tell you something." Her voice wasn't like I remembered. It was lower, softer, like life had bruised it. I glanced behind her, almost expecting Dylan to step out from a nearby car. But no one was there, just her. Just the woman who had hollowed out my trust and now stood before me like she wanted a piece of it back. "I found the envelope," she said quietly. "The one with the photo. The cafe." I froze. I had forgotten about that stupid orange envelope. Meline took a few hesitant steps forward but didn't try to close the space between us. "It didn't come from you, did it?" I shook my head. She exhaled sharply, looking down at her shoes for a long moment, then back at me. I thought it was you. I thought you were warning me, testing me. But it wasn't, was it? No, I said, my voice barely louder than the wind. She nodded as if that confirmed something she'd feared. Then it was him. Dylan. I said nothing. Meline ran a hand through her hair, which was shorter than it used to be, cut just above her shoulders. Now she looked older, tired in a way that went beyond appearance. He sent it to hurt you, to get you to leave. I know that now. I finally found my voice. It worked. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them, tears lining the edges. He used me, Everett. I thought I loved him. I thought he was giving me something you couldn't, something real. But I was wrong. I scoffed. Couldn't help it. You told him I was the safe choice, Meline. You laughed about it like I was a joke. She flinched. I said things I'll regret for the rest of my life. I was lost, selfish. I let someone manipulate me into thinking you were the problem just because you weren't flashy or reckless. I crossed my arms. So what changed? And then she said it. 5 words. 5 words that made my entire chest go still. I had his baby. It died. My stomach dropped. Meline looked up at me, tears now spilling freely. It was early 16 weeks. I didn't even tell him at first. He was furious when I did. Said I ruined his life. Then he blocked me, changed his number, moved out while I was at work. I felt a cold chill spread through my ribs like winter had slipped inside my skin. She kept going. I lost the baby a month later, alone in a hospital room. And I thought, this is what I chose. This is the bed I made. This is what I destroyed my marriage for. I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to scream at her. But all I felt was numb, a strange, crushing stillness. There were no victors here. No one won, only damage. I don't want you back, she said suddenly, firmly. I don't deserve that. I know that. I had to say it. I had to tell you that I see it all now. What I had, what I threw away, who I became. She started to turn, but then hesitated. There's more. Something I didn't plan to tell you, but I think you need to know. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just stood there, bracing myself. Meline looked me in the eyes and said, the night I told you I was at Monica's, I wasn't just with him. My mother was there. She introduced us. I blinked. What? She knew about him. She encouraged it. Said you weren't strong enough for me. Said I needed a man who could challenge me, not just love me. She convinced me to start seeing him behind your back. I couldn't speak, couldn't even move. And after you disappeared, she added, voice breaking. She told everyone you were unstable, that you'd abandoned me out of nowhere. She even tried to file a missing persons report. A laugh, cold and bitter, escaped my throat. So, she buried me twice. Meline nodded, tears falling silently now. And just like that, the numbness faded, not into rage, but into something else, something I didn't expect. Clarity. This wasn't about getting her back. This was about finally understanding what I had escaped from and why I was never, ever going back. For a while, we just stood there in the cold. No more words, no more confessions, just the sound of the lake behind us, barely moving, like even the water wasn't sure how to react. I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have walked back into that motel room and left her standing there with her guilt and her shattered stories. But I didn't, couldn't, not because I wanted her back. I didn't, but because something in her eyes told me this wasn't just about closure. It was about something else. Why now? I finally asked. Why come here after everything? Meline looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers like they were trying to confess on their own. Because there's more you don't know, and I don't know who else to tell. Who else would even believe me? I crossed my arms. Try me. She looked up. It wasn't just Dylan. He wasn't the first. The air went still. My jaw clenched as I took a slow breath through my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know, but she told me anyway. There was someone else before him. Just once, years ago, during that marketing convention in Tampa. I told you I got food poisoning and spent the weekend in my room. I didn't. She said it like she was dropping a bomb gently, like there was a way to make betrayal less lethal by softening the tone. My mind raced back. Tampa. I remembered calling her hotel and getting no answer. Her texting me late saying the Wi-Fi was bad. How I sent flowers to the front desk and never heard if she got them. I always chalked it up to travel stress. Turns out, she'd been in someone else's bed the whole time. She noticed the change in my face but didn't flinch. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said. I came because I couldn't carry all of this anymore. You deserve the truth. You always did. I turned my back to her and walked toward the lake. I didn't want her to see my expression. I didn't want to give her that satisfaction of knowing how deep the blade had gone. I stared at the water and whispered, "You spent 7 years married to a man who never cheated, never lied, never even looked at another woman, and you made me feel like I was boring for it." She didn't respond. What could she say? When I finally turned back, I saw that she wasn't standing alone anymore. There was a figure behind her, an older man, late 50s maybe, walking up the gravel path toward us. He wasn't dressed like someone from the motel. Too polished, too deliberate. Meline turned, startled, and then froze. "Dad!" That caught me off guard. He looked at me, then at her, and shook his head like he just walked into the final scene of a movie he hated. "I told you not to come here," he said quietly. "What are you doing here?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I've been following your GPS since Tuesday. You weren't subtle." He looked at me again, and this time his eyes lingered. "Everett, I'm sorry to crash in like this, but I think you need to know what she told you barely scratches the surface." Meline spun on him. "You don't get to speak for me." But he didn't back down. He pulled something from his coat pocket and handed it to me. A folded sheet of paper. He waited in silence as I opened it. It was a notarized affidavit. The name at the top made my heart jolt. Carolyn Farrow, her mother. The statement underneath was brief but clear, dated 6 months ago. Sworn testimony. In her own words, "I encouraged my daughter to engage in extramarital relationships because I believed her husband was incapable of providing her with the lifestyle and stimulation she deserved. I accept full responsibility for that advice." I stared at the page, my hands trembling. It was real. It was official. It was damning. She was preparing to use it in court, her father said, to protect herself in case you ever came back and tried to take legal action. That's how messed up this got. Meline looked like she'd been punched in the chest. "You stole that from my files." He ignored her. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Everett. But I also couldn't sit by and let her manipulate the situation again. I didn't know who to look at. Him, her, the paper, the lake. Nothing felt real anymore. It was like I'd stepped outside of my own life and into someone else's disaster." Meline's voice was shaking now. "I didn't plan to use it, I swear. I had it drawn up in a moment of panic after I lost the baby and Dylan vanished. I didn't know what you'd do if you ever came back. I took a step back from both of them." "You were going to paint me as a threat?" I asked. "After everything you did?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I felt something sharp in my chest then. Not heartbreak, not anger, finality. It was over. Not just the marriage, not just the years we lost. The entire version of my life that included her was done. This wasn't someone I could pity or save or fix. This was a woman who had tried to rewrite the story so she'd look like the one who suffered. And now that the truth was out, I realized something chilling. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here because she had nowhere else left to go. I didn't say anything for a long time. The silence stretched out like fog between the three of us. Meline stood, stiff and pale. Her father looked like he wanted to melt into the gravel. And I just kept holding that folded affidavit, barely able to believe the weight of what I'd read. Everything about this was worse than I imagined. I'd prepared for the possibility of lies. I'd braced for tears, even some twisted version of regret. But I hadn't prepared for strategy, for a pre-written defense, for a mother and daughter scheming together behind my back while I was gone, just in case I dared to exist again. And now I was supposed to just process it all. Forgive, forget, walk away with grace like the gentleman they always assumed I was. No, not this time. You didn't come here to apologize, I finally said, looking directly at Meline. You came here because you were hoping you could control the story before it swallowed you whole. She shook her head. No, Everett. Yes. I cut in sharper than I intended. You showed up alone to look like a victim. You let your father bring this affidavit, hoping I'd be shocked enough to keep quiet. But none of this is about me, is it? It's about keeping your version of the story intact. The story where you were confused, where he manipulated you, where I just vanished and you were left to suffer. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I turned to her father. I don't know if you think you're helping, but dragging this into daylight doesn't make you the hero. You let this happen. You knew what she was doing, what her mother was doing, and you stood on the sidelines until the house was already burned to ash. He nodded quietly, ashamed. I know. I should have stepped in years ago. I folded the affidavit and shoved it into my coat pocket. I'm keeping this. Meline's eyes snapped up. Why? I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the woman I once loved. I saw someone else entirely. Because I'm not going to disappear again. If I'm ever accused of abandoning you or being unstable or dangerous, this little piece of paper will be the difference between truth and fiction. She looked like I'd slapped her. You really think I'd stoop that low? I blinked. You already did. A car passed slowly behind us on the gravel road, crunching the silence into bits. The wind picked up. I was still standing there without gloves, my fingertips going numb, but I didn't move. Not yet. There was one question I hadn't asked, one that had been burning in the back of my throat since the moment she showed up at the motel. So I asked it. Meline, were you ever going to tell me about the baby? She looked up, startled, and there it was, just a flash, but I saw it. Guilt, real and raw. No, she whispered. I wasn't. I swallowed the hard lump forming in my throat. Not even after it died? She hesitated, then shook her head slowly. It would have made it worse. For you, for me. I told myself that you'd be better off not knowing. The lie, even in its twisted packaging of protection, still burned. You wanted to erase me, I said, my voice suddenly calm. That's what all of this was. You wanted a clean slate so you could be the grieving ex-wife. And the moment that story stopped serving you, you came here. She looked down at her feet. Don't bother denying it, I added. You rehearsed your lines before you ever pulled into this town. Her father shifted uncomfortably beside her, and I could tell even he was starting to see the full shape of what she'd done. Then something unexpected happened. She dropped to the ground, just sank to her knees in the cold gravel, hands to her face, sobbing. Not delicate, not performative. This was something different, something fractured. I don't know who I am anymore, she said through the tears. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. And when I did, I thought maybe I could tell you everything and you'd still see me. I do, I replied flatly. I see you exactly as you are. She kept crying, but I didn't move. I'd spent a year grieving a woman who didn't exist, a version of Meline that was long gone. If she'd ever truly been real in the first place. What was in front of me now wasn't someone I hated. It was someone I'd survived. And suddenly the pain in my chest, the one that had been following me like a shadow all this time, started to loosen. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need her to suffer. I needed distance. I needed air. And I needed to ask myself what kind of life I wanted next, because I was finally free to build it. I didn't help her up. I didn't offer my hand or pretend to comfort her. That part of me, the part that instinctively tried to protect her from everything, including herself, was gone. Burned off like fog under a rising sun. She sat on the gravel, crumpled and crying, her father silent beside her. I didn't move, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I had nothing left to give her. Eventually, her sobs softened into shaky breathing, and she rose to her feet on her own. Her hair was windblown, her knees dusted with dirt, The woman who once planned lavish dinner parties and smiled through wine tastings was now a shadow of that carefully curated image. And still, some part of her expected something from me. Maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding, maybe one last scrap of the man she married. But all I said was, "You should go." She looked startled, like she'd misread the moment, like she thought that breaking down in front of me might unlock some old code and return her to a place where she was still my wife. But I wasn't her husband anymore. "I just want to explain," she started, but I raised a hand. "I don't need explanations, Meline. I need peace. And that starts with you being somewhere else." She blinked back more tears, but I could tell they weren't going to work this time. Not on me. Her father gave me a nod, apologetic, respectful, and touched her shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's go." To her credit, she didn't argue. She just turned toward their car, slow and silent. But before she got in, she glanced back at me one last time. "I never stopped loving you," she said. I didn't respond because it didn't matter. Love that is hoarded, twisted, and weaponized isn't love at all. And no amount of confession could change what she'd done. They drove off. I watched until the car disappeared down the narrow road that led back to the highway. And when it was finally quiet again, truly quiet, I walked back inside my motel room. The air felt different, lighter, maybe, or maybe I was just finally breathing fully again. I sat down at the little wooden desk by the window, turned on the lamp, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside were a few printed resumes, a draft of a short story, and a list of places I might move to permanently. I'd already spent too long hiding in limbo. It was time to live again on my terms. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't stare at the ceiling. I didn't replay conversations or imagine alternate endings. Instead, I did something simple. I logged into an old email account I hadn't used in months, the one I set up just before I left. It had a single unread message from Meline's mother. I sat back, heart thudding, and opened it. The subject line read, "You made your point." Inside was a single sentence. "You humiliated her enough. Come back and fix what you broke." I stared at it for a long time, and then I did something that surprised even me. I hit reply and I wrote, "I didn't break your daughter. You handed her the hammer and told her where to swing." Then I blocked the address. Done. But that email, that last pathetic attempt to guilt me back into servitude, made something else click. These people, Meline, her mother, they didn't mourn what they lost. They mourned losing control over how they were seen. So, I decided then and there to do something I hadn't done since the day I disappeared. I picked up the phone and called someone from my past. Her name was Quinn. She had been my editor once. Years ago, I used to write columns about small-town life, quiet reflections, even essays about grief and healing. Back when writing came easy and the world felt like it made a little more sense. When she answered and heard my voice, there was a long pause. "Everett," she said, "are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "Better than I've been in a long time. I've got a story I think your readers might be ready for." She laughed softly. "If it's from you, I already want to publish it." I stayed up late that night writing, but not about Meline. Not directly. I wrote about choices, about the moments that define us when no one is watching, about leaving quietly, about healing loudly, about what it means to be betrayed by the person who once made you feel safest. I didn't use names. I didn't need to. The truth always knows how to echo without shouting. When I submitted it 2 days later, Quinn replied with 4 words, "This will help people." For the first time in what felt like years, I believed that maybe I could, too. I didn't expect the story to spread the way it did. I titled the piece, "The Day I Chose Silence." A calm, meditative essay about walking away from betrayal without fanfare. I wrote it without vengeance in mind, without names or graphic details, just truth. The quiet kind. The kind that wraps around a reader slowly and doesn't let go. Quinn ran it online first. Said she wanted to test the waters. That first day, it got a few thousand views, modest but engaged. Then the shares started. First on Reddit, then Facebook, then Instagram screenshots and email newsletters and podcast readings. By the end of the first week, it had been viewed over 2 million times. I started getting messages from people all over the country. Some anonymous, others raw and pouring open their hearts like I'd written their own secrets. Men and women both. Some had left. Some were too scared to. Others were still lying awake next to people who didn't even realize they'd already lost them. One message hit me hardest. It was from a woman in Oregon who said, "I didn't cry until I read the line, 'I see you exactly as you are.'" That was the moment I realized I'd never actually looked at my husband with both eyes open. I didn't write back to her. Couldn't. Some messages are meant to just be received. And that one felt sacred. But not all the messages were kind. 3 days after the article went viral, I got a message from an unknown number. "So, you're the victim now?" I didn't need to guess who it was from. Meline never once addressed the piece directly, but the timing spoke volumes. I didn't reply. I just read it once and deleted it. There was nothing left between us but ashes, and I wasn't interested in breathing in any more smoke. But the message stirred something else. I realized she must have seen the article, known the reach, and if I knew Meline, and unfortunately I did, she wouldn't let it go. She wouldn't fade quietly. Not when her image was at risk. I was right. A week later, she posted something on social media. A carefully filtered selfie in a coffee shop with the caption, "Healing isn't linear. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who get praised for growing." Thousands of likes, hundreds of supportive comments, some mutual friends chiming in, saying they were here for her and how brave she was. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. It was enough to make my stomach turn. Still, I said nothing publicly. Let her have the digital sympathy parade. Let her weave her version of events for the crowd that preferred stories told in half-truths. Because I knew what she didn't. Truth doesn't need applause. It was strange, though. With every repost of my essay, every email from a stranger, I started to feel something unexpected, a kind of responsibility. Not to defend myself, not to explain, but to keep telling the story. Not just the one about leaving, but about what comes after. See, people are obsessed with betrayal. But what they rarely talk about is the silence that follows. The empty room. The nights where you almost miss them. Not because you want them back, but because your brain hasn't figured out how to stop reaching. I started writing more. Shorter essays, longer letters, memories, reflections. I sent them to Quinn every Sunday. She published one every Tuesday. They became a series, After Silence. It grew faster than I expected. Readers came back week after week, not just for drama, but for something gentler. The kind of healing you don't scream about. The kind you whisper into your pillow and hope it stays with you through the night. And through it all, I remained anonymous. No photos, no last name, no mentions of cities or states. Just me and the words. Until one day I got an offer. A publishing house, small but respected, reached out. They wanted to compile the essays into a book. Said they hadn't seen such raw connection in years. Said it reminded them of Joan Didion and Cheryl Strayed and those kinds of brutal but beautiful memoirs that didn't flinch. I told them I needed time to think because the truth was, I was afraid. Not of writing, but of being seen again, truly seen. Exposed in a way that couldn't be undone. What if Meline used it against me? What if her mother did? What if people who only knew the polished version of our marriage came crawling out of the past to question my side of the story? But then I got another message from my sister. We hadn't spoken much since I vanished. She'd always loved Meline, thought I was too quiet, too trusting. She didn't reach out when I disappeared, didn't ask questions, just accepted it as one more Everett thing that didn't make sense. But now, her message was short. I read it. I cried. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I stared at that message for a long time, and I realized something. I hadn't just survived betrayal. I'd survived erasure. And now people were finally seeing the version of me I'd spent years trying to protect, even while it was being buried under someone else's narrative. That was power. That was mine. So I emailed the publisher back. I said yes. The book came out 6 months later. It didn't hit bestseller lists or spark controversy or land me on talk shows. And honestly, I was glad. It wasn't written for fame. It was written for people like me. Quietly hurting, quietly healing, quietly rebuilding. It sold well enough to keep me going. To move out of the motel, to rent a small cabin near the water where I could breathe again, deeply and fully. I never heard from Meline again. Not after the email. Not after the social post. And that silence finally felt like a gift. Sometimes I still walk by the lake in the mornings, coffee in hand, and think about who I used to be. The man who would have forgiven too quickly, accepted too little, and vanished without truly finding himself. I'm not that man anymore. These days I still write. Not about her, not even about the past. I write about starting over, about mornings that don't ache, about choosing quiet over chaos. And somewhere along the way, that's exactly what I found. Peace. Not because she gave it to me, but because I stopped waiting for her to take it.